Hey everybody, Josh Lappin here, and we're back with another course. This is Beginning Drum Beats 101, and the focus of this course is teaching you how to get the fundamentals of the drums going. We'll be talking about how to set up your drum set properly, and we'll also begin showing you how to play the drums properly and to get your first beats going with an emphasis on reading drum music. The purpose of this course and the designation of this course is for beginner drum students or those who need a brush up in the fundamentals of drumming, or those people who are learning or wanting to learn how to read drums using notes and sheet music. So we'll be covering all those different topics in this particular series of lessons. We'll be using a combination of quarter note and eighth notes in this beginning course here. We'll be using both quarter notes and eighth notes on the hi-hat and this bass drum. So without further ado, let's first get you set up and show you how to properly set up your drums. So here we go. Alright, as you can see here, if you can look around me, you can see that I have a relatively complete set of drums here, all torn apart, and I want to show you today how to properly set up your drum set. I'm going to show you pretty much everything that you need to set up from start to finish. There won't be any tuning in this lesson, that will be contained in a second lesson. But we're going to cover all the basics of how to set up your hardware and everything else. So, for cymbals, we're only going to be using a crash and a hi-hat. But to set up other cymbals, the best thing to do is experiment and find what is best for you. There's multitudes of settings, and ultimately it's going to be up to you to decide how you want to set up your cymbals. But we're going to set up all the basic things here today. So here, we also need to cover the drum names as well for those of you who are just getting started on the drums or who need a refresher. Alright, so let's get started here. First thing you want to do in setting up your drums is get yourself a really good drum stool. It doesn't necessarily have to be this particular one here, but you want to find one that's very comfortable for you to start off with, because it's going to be the foundation of your drumming. You're going to do a lot of sitting, so you want to get as comfortable of a stool as you can. This one is an extra wide one here, made by Rock and Sock, and these probably run about $200 new. Don't quote me on that, but they're not cheap, but they're worth it. I actually got this one off of either eBay or Craigslist. I don't remember at this time, but you can get them for a discount if you need to do that. And actually too, if you want to take a look at some of my other videos on the blog, on the website, I can show you exactly how to go and buy really high quality used drum gear. In fact, this drum kit that we're using here, this Pearl Vision series, I got this used off of Guitar Center just a few months ago. But back to the setup. First you want to get a good stool, and you want to get it set up so that when you sit down, that your legs are nice, either parallel to the floor or slightly above parallel. Some guys do sit higher and some guys do sit lower, and that's going to be up to you. But personally, I recommend that you stay at about a parallel height. So just like this. Alright? So find yourself in a nice comfortable position for your drum stool. Get it set up. So this is either the drum stool or the drum throne, or a seat, whatever you want to call it. The next thing we're going to set up is our bass drum, which is right here. This is a 22-inch bass drum. although bass drums can be anywhere between 18 and possibly 24 inches. But this one happens to be a 22-inch kick drum. I've already got it set up, at least set up like you're supposed to. And you want to set it up so your front batter head is facing you this way and the resonant head is facing that way. Now, the bass drum comes up with these little legs right here. And you've really got two options for it. You can either set them completely all the way down so that they're just supporting the bass drum, or in this case right here, I have them set at a slight incline, which is rocking my bass drum back just a little bit. And the reason why I like to do that is because it allows me to, or it allows the toms that I'm going to eventually mount here to actually come back a little bit. So that's the purpose of that. But if you want to keep your bass drum perfectly flat, that is a perfectly acceptable way to set up, and a lot of guys do that. So another thing that putting your bass drum back at an angle is going to do is it's going to actually throw the head back slightly, so that it's going to be closer to your beater on your bass drum pedal, which we'll talk about here soon. But that's a completely personal choice. You just need to experiment with it and decide which option you want to use. So that's the bass drum. The next thing you're going to want to do in setting up your drum set is get your pedal, your bass drum pedal. This is just a regular pearl pedal. It's a P930, which is a pretty basic model. It's not really fancy, it's not really expensive. It's about $100. So, like I said, just a really basic drum pedal. And the drum pedals are a pretty simple setup. You've got this supporting plate, and this is your actually foot plate that you're going to place your foot on to play. There's a chain that connects to a beater, and there's a spring here which controls the tension. So that's what makes it be able to go back and forth here like this, is that spring. Up here you've got a little screw knob thing that will help adjust your the angle of your beater. So if you want your beater to go more forward, you can, or you can adjust it so that it comes back even more. And to do that, you just need a drum key, which I have right here, and you would simply just loosen it up and adjust the angle as you would want to, and then start from there. I've got mine set probably at about a 45-degree angle, looks like right there. Other things about this too is there is another screw here that you can adjust the beater. This is a multi-beater. It's actually two surfaces. You either can play this felt surface, or we've got a hard plastic surface here that will allow you to get more of a punch out of your bass drum. I prefer the hard plastic, but the felt is just as good for playing too. So that's just a quick overview of the pedal, how it works. So after that, what you want to do is you want to get it connected to your bass drum. And to connect it to your bass drum, you've got this little clamp at the bottom here that you're going to screw into the bottom of your bass drum, just like this. Make sure it's slid all the way forward as much as it can go. And then there's a little tension thing at the bottom here where we can tighten it and get it. You want to get it relatively tight so it's not going to slip around, but at the same time you don't want to get it so tight that you're going to damage the wood on your bass drum. Now my bass drum has a little rubber piece at the bottom there which helps prevent that. So once you're connecting, you can see how the beater is going to move and impact the head. And again, you want to make sure that you have your bass drum spurs set up good and solid so that your bass drum is not going to move around, because you're going to be putting some pretty heavy damage on this thing when you get going. So the bass drum is set up. You can see how that works there. Okay. We'll talk about playing technique a little bit later on in the next video. But so we got that set up. And one thing I wanted to mention too, which I'll probably do a whole different blog post about, is I'm using the Remo silent stroke heads. So these heads are supposed to be about anywhere between 50 to 80% more quiet than a normal drum head. So that's why I'm able to do this video and talk and still kind of play the drums and they not be a distraction to us. Alright, so once you get that set up, the next thing you want to do is you want to get your stool and you want to find a comfortable position in front of the bass drum to align yourself with. And I'm assuming most of you are going to be right-handed players, so you're going to play with the right foot. But if you're not, all you have to do is just completely reverse what I'm saying and it should work for you. So, like I said, I am going off being a right-handed player, so I'm playing with my right foot. So I want to get set up somewhere so that when I rest my foot on the pedal, that it's at a very natural angle. You don't want to be too far forward, otherwise it's going to make it uncomfortable. And if you're too far backward, it's going to be hard to play and hard to reach your drum. So when I have my stool properly set up, I should be able to place my foot. It's slightly in front of me, just slightly, but not much. You can see it's just a little bit at a little bit of an angle, which allows me to play very comfortably and in a very natural motion with as little bit of the least amount of effort that you need to put into it, because you want your energy to go into your playing and your expression, not trying to make the drums work harder than you have to. So there you go. So you can see already we've got our bass drum and our stool and our bass drum pedal set up. So we're ready to go. Alright, next you're going to need a snare stand. And I have all Pearl hardware, but you can use hardware for any company. Any major brand should do just fine. Here's a Pearl snare stand. It's completely folded up right now. So I'm just going to raise it up a little bit for us. There's a multitude of adjustments available here to get this thing set up. So we're just going to open the legs up here to a nice moderate angle. You may need to adjust this up and down depending on your preferences of height and how well it's fitting in with your other hardware. But there should be like usually 3 legs on these things, makes it nice and sturdy. And then at the top you've got this little 3-armed deal that's going to actually hold the sides of the snare drums here. So get that out, and then you want to get your snare drum. And get it positioned to somewhere. This is important. You want to position it in a place where you're not going to interfere with your snares here. The snares on your drum, which we'll talk about more in the tuning lesson, will need to be able to go on and off with just a little lever here with no interference. So when you're setting up your snare drum, just make sure that you're not interfering with those snares in any way. So it takes a little bit of adjustment here to find the right angle. But once you do, you just tighten the arms with this little screw mechanism in the bottom until it's nice and tight. And then you may need to swivel your drum around a little bit. I'm going to have to readjust this one here because it didn't quite come as like I wanted it to. Let's try this. That's a little bit better. Alright, let's get it tightened up. And here again, this is where you're going to find some variation in setups, which is fine. There are some guys who like their snare to be perfectly level, 100% level, no angle, and that's perfectly fine. This is actually a little bit leaning forward, which some guys do that too. So that's perfectly level right there, which is perfectly fine. It works great. I prefer just a tiny bit of a kickback on the snare, just a little bit. And that allows me to get a good rim shot, which we'll talk about at a different point, and play everything really well without getting too much rim. If you want to get a lot of rim, just keep that thing parallel and flat and you'll get a lot of rim. But I want a little bit of rim and be able to control how much I get, so I kick it back just a little bit. And it also makes a nice transition between snare and tom. So that's why I do it. Alright, make sure you didn't move your seat anywhere, because after you have your snare in place, you want to just turn it around and find a nice position somewhere in front of your bass drum. You got to play with the angle of this, of the drum here based on the legs. So I'm just going to pop them up a little bit. You want it to set about right here, where it's in front of your drum set, in front of your bass drum, but it's not interfering with your ability to play with your foot. So it's basically right in between my legs right here, and I kind of sit into V position with my leg, my right bass drum leg pointed forward, and my left leg is a slight bit off to the side here, and the snare drum is right in between that. So just like that. And then if you want to see here, so here's a pair of drumsticks. Here's your snare drum. That feels nice and comfortable. You want your snare drum set not too high but not too low. So that's a good angle to start off with. Alright, so far we've got bass drum pedal, and snare drum set up. Now the next thing that I recommend setting up is your hi-hat. So this is my hi-hat stand. It's another Pearl. Like I said, this one's a little bit more of a complex piece of machinery here. It's got this tripod leg base. And here's a pedal right here. And this pedal is actually going to move this rod up and down when I press it. So just make sure everything is nice, the legs are nice and sturdy at the bottom, because you'll be putting a lot of work into this too with your feet, so you don't want to be wobbling around. Alright, so there's our hi-hat stand. You've got this rod here on which you're going to mount your hi-hat. So you get your bottom hat, and it should slide right in here, right on top of your hi-hat stand. So this is the bottom hat. Alright, here's my top hat, and a hi-hat is a series of two cymbals that are going to actually mount on top of each other. One is facing down and one is facing up. Then you got to get the clamp piece that goes with your hi-hat stand. And you're just going to insert a little piece right here, right into the top of the hi-hat stand, and then just screw the little nut on the bottom. And here again, a lot of this is completely up to personal preference. Obviously you want to get it to a point where it's going to be stable, but after that it's completely up to you. Some guys keep it really loose here, and some guys tighten it up as tight as it can go. I'm always of the opinion that you should go somewhere in the middle, so that's what I'm going to do. Not too tight, but not too loose either. So it ends up looking like this, where this little piece is here. And this little piece has a hole in it, so it's going to slide right on top of that rod, just like this. And that's what's going to make your hi-hat. So for this thing to completely work, you want to press down on your pedal just a little bit, and then tighten this part at the top. So when you lift back up, as you can see, it's going to create this space between the two cymbals that you can move up and down. And this again is another place where it's going to completely be up to your personal preference. Some guys will set their hi-hats like this, and some guys will set them so they barely open at all. Me, I usually go somewhere between 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches. As you can see right here. Also, I've got this thing, there's a little knob at the bottom under here, which you can turn the tension, and what it'll do is it'll actually move the bottom hat at an angle. And that angle allows you to get more of a sizzle out of the hi-hats if you want to get that sound. So once you have your hi-hats together, we'll talk about hi-hat technique in a different lesson. It's going to sound like this, kind of. Also, to mention, these are Zildjian low volume cymbals, so it's not going to sound like a completely normal hi-hat, but it's pretty cool to play. We can discuss that in another video too. But the hi-hat complex mechanism of cymbals here. You can play it completely closed, which my foot is all the way down, keeping it from moving. You can play it open. You get a sizzle sound. And you can do a lot of different things with it. You can open and close it. Or you can even do what they call a heel splash. So, or you can open and close it with your foot as well and get that sound. So that's your hi-hat. Now your hi-hat, if you're playing right-handed style, is going to go to the left of your snare drum. So let's get that set up. You want to set your hi-hat up at a place where your foot is naturally going to rest and complement what you've already got set up with your bass drum and snare drum. Alright, let me move so you can see that right there. There's the hi-hat. And the height between your snare drum and hi-hat is then also another personal preference. I've got mine set at a moderate height. And again, some guys go up really high, some guys go down really low. I go somewhere in the middle. So you got to experiment and see what feels best for you. You want to be able to play your snare drum and your hi-hat comfortably without interfering with each other and the other instruments. So you'll find a place which feels natural for you. So here we got stool, throne, snare drum, hi-hat, bass drum, and bass drum pedal set up. So that's a good foundation to start with. And this will end the first part of our series on setting up drums. And in the second part of our series, we're going to discuss how to get the rest of your cymbals and the tom-tom set up. Hey everyone, welcome back to Beginning Drum Beats 101. In our first part of our series, we discussed how to set up the foundation of your drum kit, which includes the drum stool or throne, the bass drum and bass drum pedal, snare drum, and the hi-hats. So in this second part of our series, we're going to discuss how to get your tom set up and how to get some cymbals set up. Alright, so we've got our foundation of our drum set up here, which should feel very natural and comfortable to you when you sit there. Like I said, this is the foundation. You can actually create quite a bit of beats and get quite a bit of playing done on just these three instruments here: bass drum, snare drum, and hi-hat. But it's always nice to have a little more color and a little more options for your playing. So let's work on setting up the toms next. Alright, you'll see over here in the corner that I've got a set of toms. This is going to end up being a 5-piece drum kit. So I've got 3 toms over here. So for your toms, I recommend that you set up your floor tom first. That's just my recommendation. It pairs well with everything else, and you want to get it set up in a comfortable position so it doesn't interfere with your bass drum playing. So let's get that set up. As you can see, the tom, it's a rather big drum, at least the floor tom is. This is a 16-inch floor tom, and floor toms sit on these little legs here, usually 3 of them. So you want to get those set up. So it'll sit right there, and again, where personal preference comes in. Some guys like them completely flat. I like a slight angle in my floor tom. So you would adjust your legs to get the height that feels good to you and the angle that feels good to you. Mine is about even with my snare drum. So to give you an idea about the height of my floor tom, you could also go a little bit lower or higher depending on your preference. But as far as positioning, we want to position the floor tom, like I said, close enough where you can reach it easily with a drumstick, but not so close that it's going to interfere with our bass drum playing leg right here. So you can see my leg is still perfectly open. There's a nice little, probably about 8 to 10 inch gap here between my snare and floor tom. I like my drums pretty close. Some people may not like it that close. And I've got it relatively close to my bass drum here too. So if you're into ergonomics or kind of the study of motion and things like that, it's very easy for me to move from snare drum to tom and back. So that's what I'm going for, ease of motion. Alright, so that's the floor tom. Next we have our rack toms. For our rack toms, I've got a 10-inch rack tom here that I'm going to be setting up next. And I always like to set up my first tom on the rack next. Now, rack toms mean that they're just mounted on something. In this case, I'm actually mounting it to my bass drum. There's a setup system here that I'll be showing you where you can mount the toms on the bass drum. But toms can also be mounted on a simple stand, or they can be mounted on a rack system. This is the most convenient way, the easiest way to do it, is to mount it right to your bass drum. But there are pros and cons to that too. It can and does interfere somewhat with the resonance and tone of your bass drum when you mount toms onto it. But like I said, it's a universal way and it's very convenient, so it is done. For our toms here, I've got a tom arm. It's multi-adjustable, where you can adjust the height here by sliding it up and down in the bass drum, and then you can adjust the angle of the tom here. These are Pearl drums, so Pearl has this integrated suspension system where you got this clamp that clamps right onto your drum here with the drum key. So there's no actual penetration of the shell, and that is supposed to help increase resonance and tone, and I think it does. Well, let's get that set up. So we're going to take our tom arm, and if we come over to our bass drum, there's actually a little mechanism here where you can slide the arm down into this hole and clamp it down. So we'll get it in position first at a moderate height. Get it locked in so it doesn't fall, and then we'll go ahead and insert our first rack tom here. As you can see, this is going to be nowhere near where I want to have it. So I'm going to set the kit and then start making adjustments to how the tom is positioned. And to adjust the angle, I'm just going to need to use a standard drum key. Okay, we're getting closer. All right, so that's a good initial setup here, which I'm not going to be able to make the final adjustments until I put my other rack tom, because they are going to have to be positioned together. So get that one set up here, and then we'll get our second rack tom. This is a 12-inch rack tom. Let me mount him. Get our other arm. Okay, so both rack toms are up. I don't really care for this positioning, but now it's time to maneuver them around and try to get them set up in a place where you feel comfortable and satisfied with the height and the angles of the toms. So let me adjust this rack tom first and making sure that I have a good transition and a good feel between this second rack tom and the floor tom, so that when I'm doing a drum fill, there's a good smooth transition here. So I feel pretty happy about where this is positioned. So a lot of tom arms have these things called memory locks, where you can actually, it's a little clamp, but it clamps right into where you want the tom to go. So I'm going to lock those in place so that for future reference I know exactly where to set these up. So next time I set them up, it'll actually be set up a lot faster. So I'm going to get my memory locks locked in position on this tom. Make sure everything's good and tight, because when I start playing, I don't want it to fall down and nick my bass drum or fall on the floor. Okay. Also want to make sure I'm not going to, if I'm playing, it's not going to interfere with the shell here. So I've only got about ½ an inch between this rack tom and the bass drum. Alright, then I'm going to finish positioning this first rack tom here. Let's see, I might want to pull this one up a little bit and pull the angle in just a tad. We'll see how that works. Okay, that's looking good. I just need to adjust my angles just a little bit here. And I'm actually rotating toms in just a tiny bit. So like I said, there's a good transition between the two, and I don't end up constantly hitting the rims of the toms if I don't want to. So I need to raise the height on this one just a tad. And I think I'll be happy with that, so I'm going to go ahead and lock in the memory locks on this one too. And just recheck make sure that everything is tight so it doesn't fall. And there you have it. There are my toms all set up. 10-inch, 12-inch, and 16-inch rack toms. So I should be able to play now very smoothly between all the drums. So my snare drum, 10-inch, 12-inch, 16-inch. Alright, those were the rack toms. Next thing you want to set up, in my opinion, is you want to set up the rest of your cymbals, and the first one you want to set up is going to be your ride cymbal. So, I've got just a regular straight stand here. I'm going to mount my ride cymbal to. So, this has just got a tripod adjustable base, just a really basic regular drum stand. And the base, for the ride cymbal, I usually mount it pretty wide and low because I want it to be able to fit right under my floor tom with no interference. So you have to play with this a little bit, but this usually goes somewhere underneath the bottom of your floor tom. And ride cymbals are usually between 18 and 22 inches. So you're going to need to position in a place where you're not going to interfere with this rack tom or the floor tom. So somewhere to the left or right of that. Alright, then I'm going to grab my ride cymbal. This is a Zildjian low volume crash ride, I use the low volume cymbals for practice. They're quite a bit reduced in volume. They don't sound amazing, but like I said, they're for practice. But for practice, they're really good. And you don't have to use earplugs or anything, and you can play and get a real drum set feel, a real cymbal feel without having to be very obnoxious to your family or neighbors. So let's get that set up. There's a little screw system at the top here of your cymbal stand. You just want to open that up. There's also should be kind of this felt washer here that helps your cymbals not to grind against metal parts of the stand. So there's one at the bottom where your ride cymbal sits on top, and then there's another one that goes over top It is between the cymbal and the little screw-on piece here. Alright, so I'm going to get that set up there. And I'm going to tension it at a pretty loose tension. I don't want them to be clamped so as to interfere with the resonance. And then finally I just need to adjust the height and the angle of this thing. For ride cymbals, I want them high enough so they're not interfering with the floor tom, but I don't want them too high. Like I said, that's just completely a personal preference. So I have to be able to play my floor tom with no interference, but be able to reach that ride cymbal relatively easily. So you can see it's right there. It doesn't interfere with the toms, and it's relatively accessible here by just moving my hand around. Okay. So that's the foundation of your drum kit and your main cymbals. You've got your ride cymbal, or sorry, your hi-hat and your ride cymbal. Now most people will want at least one more cymbal in which they would place a crash somewhere here over the first rack tom and in between the hi-hat and the rack tom. They would usually have somewhere between a 14 and 16 inch crash. All you would do is just get another boom stand and position that crash right there, and position it at a height where it's easy for you to reach coming off of a hi-hat or doing some fills around this area. You also have the ability to mount crashes pretty much anywhere you want, but for this standard setup, most people will put a crash in this area right here, and then they may put another crash over in this area, somewhere over the second rack tom and the ride cymbal. Now beyond that is completely up to you. There is a wide variety of cymbals available. Pretty much you can go from a 4 to 6 inch splash, which is about that big. You can mount that anywhere. I usually mount mine somewhere above my hi-hat here, either on the left or right, depending on how I'm feeling. Some guys mount them right in the middle here, or you pretty much mount them anywhere you want. A lot of people usually have at least 2 crashes, and those can range anywhere from about 12 inches up to 18 or 20 inches. After that, you're really into ride cymbal range. And then there's various amounts of effect cymbals like China cymbals and trash cymbals and things like that. So you have quite a bit of options available to you for setting up your drum kit. I advise you to just experiment with it based on the cymbal availability and your budget. Check out some of your favorite drummers and see how they set up their cymbals. There's no really one right way to do it. It's really based on how many cymbals do you want to have and what your budget is for cymbals, and you know, how comfortable you are. I like to usually go between 4 and 6 cymbals is my preference. That includes the ride cymbal and the hi-hat as well. So I usually like to have one crash, one splash, 2 crashes, and maybe 1 effect cymbal along with the hi-hat and the ride, and that's kind of my basic setup. I'm kind of a minimalist. I like a 5-piece drum kit. I also like to play 4 pieces, and the 4 pieces where you remove this middle rack tom and you just have the first and the floor. So those are just some of my basic suggestions for getting set up on your drums. So if you have any questions, just hit us up in the forum and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible if you have any questions about setting up your drum set. So I hope that was helpful, and next we'll get into some actual playing and show you how to get started playing on the drum set. Hey everyone, welcome back to our Beginning Drum Beats 101 series here. I'm your instructor Josh, and in the last lesson we spent some time learning how to set up our drum kit properly from scratch and just going over some of the proper terminology used for the drums and how things are the mechanics kind of work and how everything is set up. So you can see today we've got the drum kit stripped down. We're down to the hi-hat, snare, and bass drum. And the focus of today's lesson will be showing you how to use proper technique on the drum set. So we'll be discussing some grip techniques for the hands and some bass drum playing techniques for your feet. Alright, for the hands, let's get started working on those. Since we're drummers, we're going to use our hands a lot. So there's three basic grips I want to cover today in our lesson on how to hold the drumstick properly. The first and most basic grip that you should probably use and most drummers use is called the match grip. And to make the match grip, you simply pick up your drumstick, and what you want to do is you want to just simply hold it between your thumb and your first finger like that. Very simple. And then just naturally let your other fingers just fall and wrap around that drumstick. And really, that's all there is to it. So, it's just like that. Now, there's a lot of different theories about match grip. What you want to do is basically you want the stick to rotate or kind of pivot between your thumb and your first finger. Now this is the one I'm showing you for the purposes of our courses and lessons. There are variations of this as well, so if you see somebody else showing you how to do it another way, you want to give it a try, that's up to you. But for our purposes, the fulcrum or the hinge is going to be between the thumb, the first finger, and the other fingers wrap around and support the stick. These two fingers do most of the gripping and the working, but these back fingers do provide some support and some extra ways to get the stick and to control the stick. Alright, so you would do that with both hands. Pinch it between the thumb and the first finger, and then just let the other fingers kind of wrap around there like that. Now, depending on how you're positioning your wrist is going to be how or which grip you're actually using. So, to do the match grip, you simply just take the sticks and you drop them in like this, so that your wrist or like this. And what this does is it forces you to use your wrist and your fingers simultaneously. And when we start, if you go and take our Snare Drum 101 course, we cover the grips and different motions a lot more in depth, because we're spending a lot of time focusing on snare drum development and technique with that. But I still want to cover in this course too, just to review the basics. But that wrist is going to give you a lot of power and a lot of motion on the drum, and it'll allow you to do things called the molar technique, which, like I said, we explain a whole lot more in the Snare Drum Mastery 101 series. But basically, match grip is like this, and if you notice too that there's a slight angle to the sticks. I'm not holding them straight like this. There's a little angle that's naturally there, just based on the way your hands are shaped. So that's match grip. Now, if you take your left hand, you turn it up like this. It's going to be opposite on the camera, obviously. And then you take your stick and place it between your thumb and your first finger again, like this. And then just let that first finger kind of naturally fold back and touch your thumb. It's going to slightly push your middle finger out, and it's going to rest in between those fingers like that. That is basically the basic setup for what they call traditional grip. So your left hand would be like this, and your right hand would be the normal match grip. So that's traditional grip. That's what a lot of marching guys do. A lot of guys who play jazz use this grip. So it's something to familiarize yourself with and to use. And again, a lot of this is covered in the Snare Drum Mastery 101 series. And then finally, if we just take our match grip and we just flip our wrist up so that our thumbs are straight up, that's more of a French grip. I use French grips for certain rolls. They're great for single stroke rolls. I also think they use this grip when you play a timpani in like a symphony. So it has its usage. Most of the time, well, I actually alternate between all three grips depending on the style I'm playing and what kind of feel that I want to get. For heavier stuff, I'm going with match grip. For lighter stuff, I'm going with French grip. And for jazz and more lighter things, I'm going with the traditional grip. So those are your grips. And when you're playing the drums, you want to just keep those grips in mind. But most of the demonstrations in this video will be using match grip. So when you see me playing, I'll be using match grip. Alright. Next, I just want to briefly cover a couple of techniques to use on the bass drum. There's two main ones. Very simple. There's a heel up technique wherein that you play with your heel up, just like it says, and there's a heel down. So both of them have value and both of them are useful. So just to demonstrate the heel up, basically when I got my heel up, I'm keeping my heel up pretty much the entire time that I'm playing a note. So you can see how I'm using my ankle almost as a wrist and getting a kind of circular motion going there on my bass drum. Well, that's heel up. Heel up is used for power and is also used for speed. Now heel down, I'm simply planting my heel at the bottom of the pedal. You can see my foot there, the heel is down. And then I'm just kind of pushing the bass drum pedal with the ball of my feet and kind of my toes, like that. Now heel up is not quite as powerful, and I usually use heel up when I'm playing lighter passages on the drums. And I don't need quite as much power or my leg needs a break. There's also different techniques that you can use as well. There's a heel toe method and a couple of other different methods that's kind of beyond the scope of this course. But I just wanted to give you a really quick brief overview of the basic techniques that you need to know to get started on the drums. You really need to only know three. I've covered 5 here, but you really need to know 3. You just need to know match grip for your hands and either heel up or heel down on your bass drum. So again, heel down, I'm just playing with my heel down and I'm just kind of pushing the pedal with my toe and the ball of my foot. And the heel up, I almost constantly have my heel up and I'm driving the pedal kind of with the ball of my foot. So there you have it. Those are the main techniques we'll be using in this series for the remainder of the series. So review those and practice them and get ready to start playing some drum beats.